Hi guys! For reading this week, we have a new story that we're going to be looking at. It's actually just part of a story. It's from this book called Hey World, Here I Am. We'll get to that in just a second. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to continue to focus on important ideas and summarizing. This is an incredibly useful skill to have when you're talking about reading, especially if you're ever doing a book report, or even if you're just trying to recommend a book to a friend and you want to tell them a little bit about it without giving everything away. So we're going to practice summarizing and picking out the most important parts of a piece of writing and sharing them with somebody else. Okay? So I'm going to read a chapter from this book. This is called Hey World, Here I Am. It's by Jean Little with illustrations by Sue Trusdell. And it's actually a collection of stories, poems, and other writings by a fictional teenager named Kate Bloomfield. We're going to read a part called Mrs. Buell, who is the woman that owns the neighborhood store where Kate goes and does shopping and things. I'm going to read it all the way through once. I am going to read it a little quickly, so if you need to change the playback speed so you can listen more carefully, please do that. But I am going to stop every once in a while and ask you to go and write a sentence or two in your Seesaw activity. So make sure you have that pulled up and ready to go so that you can pause the video and go answer that question when we get there. Okay? So this is called Mrs. Buell. For years and years, for what seems like forever, I've gone to Buell's when I had a dime to spare. It's a run-down, not very clean corner store. Kids go there mostly for licorice and bubblegum and jawbreakers and popsicles and comic books and cones. She only has 3 flavors and the cones taste stale. Still, she'll sell you 1 scoop for 15 cents. It's not a full scoop, but it's cheaper than anywhere else. It's the only place I know where a kid can spend 1 penny. Mrs. Buell is run down too, and a grouch. She never smiles or asks you how you are. Little kids are scared to go in there alone. We laugh at them, but really we understand. We felt it too, when we were smaller and had to face her towering behind the counter. She was always the same. Except that once. So I'm going to pause right there. And what I would like you to do is go and answer the first stop question, which is, what is the most important thing to understand or remember about that part we just read? What do you think is the most important part to understand or remember? My cat might make an appearance here in a second. So if she does, I apologize. She's going to trip me up on my reading. Okay, so if you're back here now, you've answered that question, and we're ready for the next part. She was always the same. There she is. Oh. She was always the same, except that once. I tripped going in and fell and scraped my knee. It hurt so much that I couldn't move for a second. I was winded, too, and I had to gasp for breath. I managed not to cry, but I couldn't keep back the tears. I managed not to cry out, but I couldn't keep back the tears. Mrs. Buell is big, but she moved like lightning. She hauled a battered wooden chair out from behind the curtain that hung across the back. Then, without a word, she picked me up and sat me down on it. Sorry guys, I'm going to sneeze in the middle of my reading. We were alone in the store, but I wasn't afraid. Her hands, scooping me up, had been work-roughened, hard but kind. She still didn't speak. Instead, she took a bit of rag out of her sweater pocket, bent down, and wiped the smear of blood off my knee. The rag looked grayish, but her hands were gentle. I think she liked doing it. Then she fetched a Band-Aid and stuck it on. Does it still sting? She asked, speaking at last in a voice I'd never heard her use before. I shook my head, and she smiled. At least, I think she did. It only lasted a fraction of a second. And I wasn't looking straight at her. At that moment, Johnny Trisano came in with 1 nickel clutched in his fist. He was so intent on, intent on means focused on. He was so intent on the candies he hardly noticed me. He stood and stood, trying to decide. Make up your mind or take yourself off, she growled. She had gone back behind the counter. I waited for her to look at me again, so that I could thank her. But when he left, she turned her back and began moving things around on the shelves. I had meant to buy some jujubes, but I lost my nerve. After all, everybody knew she hated kids. She was probably sorry now that she'd fixed my knee. I slunk out, which means sneaked away quietly. I slunk out without once opening my mouth. Yet, whenever I looked down and saw the Band-Aid, I felt guilty. As soon as one corner came loose, I pulled it off and threw it away. I didn't go near the store for weeks. Okay, that's our second stop. I want you to go and answer the same question out of the section we just read. What is the most important part to understand or remember from that part we just read? Write one or two things if you can. Okay, we're ready for the third section. I didn't go near the store for weeks. She was terribly fat. She got so hot in summer that her hair hung down in wet strings and her clothes looked limp. In winter, she wore the same sweater every day, a man's gray one, too big, with the sleeves pushed up. They kept slipping down and she'd shove them back up 1,000,000 times a day. Yet she never rolled up the cuffs to make them shorter. She never took days off. She was always there. We didn't like her or hate her. We sort of knew that selling stuff to kids for a trickle of small change wasn't a job anybody would choose, especially in that poky little place with flies in summer and the door being open all winter, letting in blasts of cold air. Even after that day when she fixed my knee, I didn't once wonder about her life. Then I stopped at Buell's one afternoon, and she wasn't there. Instead, a man and woman I'd never laid eyes on were behind the counter sorting through stacks of stuff. They were getting some boxes down off a high shelf right then, so they didn't hear me come in. I was so amazed, I just stood there, gawking. Gawking means to stare stupidly and kind of like in shock, so if you're gawking at someone or something, you're kind of just staring and with kind of a dumb or blank expression on your face. How Ma stood this cruddy hole, I'll never know, the woman said, backing away from a cloud of dust. Didn't she ever clean? Give the subject a rest, Glow, he answered. She's dead. She won't bother you any longer. I tried, Harry. You know I tried. Over and over, I told her she could move in with us. God knows I could have used a bit of cash and her help looking after those kids. I think I must have made a sound then. Anyway, she whirled around and saw me. This place is closed, she snapped. Harry, I thought I told you to lock the door. What did you want? I didn't want anything from her, but I still could not believe Mrs. Buell wasn't there. I stared around. I said we're shut. If you don't want anything, beat it, she told me. Okay, third stop. The most important thing to understand or remember from that section. Pause the video and go answer. Okay, last part. The minute I got home, I phoned Emily. She said her mother had just read it in the paper. She had a daughter? Emily said, her voice echoing my own sense of shock. She died of a heart attack. Kate, her whole name was Catherine Ann Buell. Catherine, I said slowly. My name is really Catherine, although only Dad calls me by it. I can't believe it somehow. No, Emily said she was just always Mrs. Buell. I told her about Glow and Harry. After we hung up, though, I tried to imagine Mrs. Buell as a child. Instead, I saw her bending down, putting that Band-Aid on my knee. Her hair had been thin on top, I remembered, and she'd had dandruff. She had tried not to hurt me. Glow's voice talking about her had been so cold. Had she had anyone who loved her? It seemed unlikely. Why hadn't I smiled back? But, to be honest, something else bothered me even more. Her going had left a hole in my life. Because of it, I knew, for the first time, that nothing was safe. Not even the everyday, taken for granted, background of my being. Like Mrs. Buell pushing up her sweater sleeves and giving me my change. So that's the end of our reading for today. And I have a couple questions for you, but I am running out of time and space on this video. So what I'm going to tell you to do is to check the Seesaw assignment. If you need it read aloud, there's always a voice recording that I give with every assignment to read the assignment out loud to you. So if you need to hear them, go ahead and read that. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to read them in this section, but you'll go and answer a couple of those questions, and then go ahead and do your 30 minutes of IDR time as well. and let me know what book you're on and as well as what page you started reading on today. And then I'll ask you the same thing in the next assignment so you can tell me how many pages you read. So I miss you guys. Good luck.